The unexpected intrusion. It was an ordinary evening in Sarah's life, or at least, that's how it seemed at first. She had just finished a long day at school and was looking forward to a few hours of relaxation. Her room, a small but cozy space, was where she felt most comfortable. She had her music playing softly in the background, a habit she'd picked up to unwind after the day's events. The gentle hum of her favorite playlist filled the air and she was lost in thought. Scrolling through her phone, it was a typical routine for her, nothing out of the ordinary. Sarah loved these moments of solitude. Her mom was out running errands and her stepfather, Mark, had gone to his office to work on some things. She liked it when the house was quiet. It gave her a chance to think, to breathe, without the pressures of the outside world. As the clock ticked away, she became more absorbed in her own little world, unaware that everything was about to change. The sound of the door creaking open broke her from her thoughts. Sarah, startled, quickly glanced toward the door. Standing there was Mark, her stepfather. It wasn't unusual for him to enter her room occasionally, but this time felt different. His presence was heavier than normal, and the expression on his face made her stop what she was doing. He didn't speak at first, just stood there staring at her. It was as if time had stopped. Sarah froze, unsure of what to do. Her first instinct was to smile and greet him. But something in the air told her this wasn't just a casual visit. Mark's eyes were wide, his expression unreadable. For a split second, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Hey, she said, her voice a little too bright, trying to brush off the strange feeling creeping up on her. She couldn't help but notice that Mark wasn't his usual self. He didn't reply right away. Instead, he just continued standing there, staring. Everything okay? Sarah asked, her words coming out softer now as she started to feel a sense of unease settle in. Mark blinked, almost as if he had been snapped out of a trance, and gave a slight nod. Yeah, I'm fine, he muttered, but his voice lacked its usual warmth. There was a hesitation in his words, a strange crack in his otherwise steady tone. For a moment, the air seemed heavy, like there was something unsaid between them. Sarah wasn't sure why, but she felt uncomfortable, as if she were being examined, watched in a way that she wasn't used to. Mark was her stepfather, someone she had known for years. He had always been a protective figure in her life, kind and caring. But tonight, everything felt different. The silence stretched between them. Sarah waited for him to speak again, but he didn't. He simply remained standing in the doorway, his eyes flickering around the room, avoiding her gaze. It was as if he couldn't decide what to do or say next. The usual warmth in his face was gone, replaced with something Sarah couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger, but it wasn't affection either. It was almost distant. Mark, she asked, this time her voice a little more uncertain. Are you sure everything's okay? Her question hung in the air, charged with an energy she couldn't understand. At last, Mark stepped forward, but his movement was slow, deliberate, as if every step was taking an enormous amount of effort. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What was happening? Why was he acting so strange? He came closer, and Sarah instinctively pulled back, a little confused by the way he was moving. This was the man who had raised her alongside her mother, the person she trusted. Why was he acting so distant? As he reached the edge of her bed, Mark paused again, his gaze locking with hers. His eyes held a flicker of something that made Sarah's stomach twist. It was as though he wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Is everything okay with you? Sarah repeated, now more firmly, trying to break the tension that had settled between them. She could feel her palms starting to sweat, and her pulse quickened as her discomfort grew. Mark's lips parted as though he was about to say something, but then closed again. He let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to intrude. With those words, he finally looked away from her. He turned to leave the room, but just before the door closed behind him, he paused and glanced back over his shoulder. I'll be downstairs if you need me, he said softly, before slipping out without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, and Sarah was left staring at the empty space where he had been standing. Her mind was racing. What had just happened? Why had Mark acted like that? It wasn't like him at all. The confusion and the uneasy feeling were eating away at her. What was going on? For a moment, Sarah just sat there, staring at the door, unable to move. The silence in the room felt different now. The air was thick with an unspoken tension. What had Mark meant by I didn't mean to intrude? It was just a visit to check on her, wasn't it? Why did it feel like something more? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden realization. Mark had left, but something about him was still lingering. She couldn't shake the feeling that the situation wasn't over yet. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't just a casual moment. Sarah had a sinking suspicion that things were about to take a strange turn. The lingering doubt. Days after Mark's strange visit were filled with confusion for Sarah. She couldn't shake the memory of that moment when he walked into her room, the eerie silence that followed, and his unsettling behavior. Everything about the encounter had felt off, but she couldn't figure out why. Mark was always so caring and protective, and this sudden shift in his demeanor didn't make sense. At breakfast the next morning, Sarah tried to act normal. Her mom was in the kitchen, humming as she prepared pancakes. But Sarah felt like she couldn't be fully present. Mark sat across from her, his usual friendly smile nowhere to be seen. He looked distracted, his eyes darting around the kitchen, never quite meeting Sarah's. The warmth he'd always had was gone, replaced with an uncomfortable coldness. "How's your day going so far?" her mom asked, her voice cheerful as she placed a plate of pancakes in front of Sarah. Sarah didn't respond right away. She glanced at Mark, who was picking at his food, but his focus was elsewhere. The tension was palpable. Her mom didn't seem to notice, too busy arranging the meal. But Sarah felt the air between them thick with unspoken words. "Fine," Sarah replied quietly, trying to push her discomfort aside. She didn't know what to say. She wanted to ask Mark if everything was okay, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. Something told her that if she confronted him again, she might uncover something she wasn't ready to hear, something that could change everything. After breakfast, Sarah decided to retreat to her room. She needed some space to think. She sat on her bed, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. Why had Mark acted the way he did? What was really going on? Had something happened that she didn't know about? Her thoughts were interrupted when Mark knocked on her door. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face him, but she knew she couldn't avoid him forever. "Come in," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark stepped inside, looking as uncomfortable as she felt. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence between them was heavy, thick with all the things that neither of them were saying. He stood by the door, his posture stiff, eyes downcast. I just wanted to check in on you," he said, his voice lacking the usual warmth. "You seemed off last night." Sarah felt a pang of frustration. "I'm fine," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, but even as she said it, she felt the lie on her tongue. She wasn't fine, not with the strange distance between them, not with the way Mark had acted. Mark nodded slowly, his eyes flicking up to meet hers for just a second. There was something in his gaze, something that sent a chill through Sarah. It was a mix of guilt and fear. "I'm sorry if I made things awkward last night," Mark continued, his voice low. "I didn't mean to upset you. I've just been dealing with some things lately." Sarah's curiosity was piqued, but she held herself back. She couldn't bring herself to ask him directly what he was dealing with. She didn't want to know. It felt like crossing a line that would make everything too real, too complicated. "It's okay," she muttered, not really believing her own words. She was lying to him, to herself. But it was easier than confronting the truth, really. But Mark didn't leave. He stood there for a moment longer, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to figure out what was going through her mind. There was an intensity in his gaze that she hadn't seen before. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind him. The moment he left, Sarah felt the weight of the silence return, but now it was different. It was like an invisible barrier had been built between them, something neither of them could cross. Sarah wasn't sure what had happened between them, but she knew that things couldn't go back to how they were. The silent, distanced following days were a blur of awkward encounters and lingering questions. Sarah tried her best to act like everything was normal, but each time she saw Mark, it was like the air thickened with unspoken words. He was still the same. His usual presence was there, but there was a distance that couldn't be ignored. He no longer looked at her the way he used to, with that familiar warmth. Instead, there was something more guarded about him, almost as if he were afraid of something. Sarah began to avoid him whenever she could, trying to find excuses to stay in her room or be anywhere else but near him. But it didn't help. Every time she walked past him in the hallway or sat down to dinner, the tension between them made her stomach twist. At dinner that evening, the awkward silence was unbearable. The usual clinking of silverware, the soft conversation between her mom and Mark, it all felt distant. Mark was unusually quiet, only speaking when directly addressed. Sarah could feel the weight of his presence, but he wasn't really there. It was as if his mind was elsewhere and his physical body was just going through the motions. Her mom didn't seem to notice. She kept talking about her day, asking Sarah about school, oblivious to the palpable distance growing between Sarah and Mark. Sarah gave short, distracted answers, but her mind was on the way Mark avoided her eyes, how he flinched when their hands nearly brushed while passing the salt. Finally, Mark broke the silence. "I've been thinking about going away for a while," he said, his voice soft, almost reluctant. "Just for a few days. I need to clear my head." Sarah froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, unable to keep the surprise out of her voice. Where would you go? Mark's eyes shifted briefly toward her, but there was no warmth in his gaze. I don't know yet, he muttered, staring into his plate. Just need some time alone for a moment. Sarah sat in stunned silence, trying to process his words. What did he mean by that? Was he going somewhere for work, or was there more to it? Was he running away from something or someone? She couldn't help but wonder if he was leaving because of her. Her mind raced with possibilities. Had she done something wrong? Was it her fault that he was acting this way? She had always trusted Mark, and the thought of him leaving, disappearing like this, sent a chill down her spine. Something didn't feel right. When dinner ended, Sarah excused herself quickly and retreated to her room, her mind spinning with confusion. She sat on the bed, replaying everything in her head. Why was he pulling away? What had happened to make him so distant? And more importantly, why did it feel like there was something he wasn't telling her? The truth unveiled. The following days were filled with a strange, nervous anticipation. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Something that would change everything between her and Mark. His sudden decision to leave had left a hole in the house. A space filled with tension and confusion. He hadn't mentioned where he was going or when he would be back, and that uncertainty gnawed at Sarah. Her mom, as usual, didn't seem to notice anything was wrong. She was busy with work, unaware of the growing rift between her husband and daughter. But Sarah could feel it with every glance, every moment Mark wasn't around. The house felt emptier, quieter. It was the night before Mark was supposed to leave, and Sarah had barely seen him all day. When she went to bed, the feeling that something was amiss intensified. She tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Her mind kept returning to the unanswered questions. Why was Mark so distant? Why was he suddenly planning to leave? What had changed between them? Unable to rest, Sarah quietly got out of bed and made her way down the hall. She didn't know why, but she felt compelled to talk to him, to ask him the questions that had been lingering in her mind for days. She stood outside his room for a moment, unsure if she should knock. But something inside her pushed her to do it. Taking a deep breath, she knocked gently on the door. Mark, she called softly. There was no answer at first, but then she heard the faint sound of movement from inside. The door creaked open slightly, and Sarah could barely make out his figure standing in the dim light. I just wanted to talk, Sarah said, her voice shaky. I don't understand why you're acting this way. Why are you leaving? What's going on? For a moment, Mark didn't speak. He just stood there, looking at her with a mixture of sadness and something else, something that Sarah couldn't quite name. His silence only deepened the unease that had been growing inside her. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice low and almost sorrowful. Sarah, I never wanted this to happen. You deserve better than all of this. I didn't mean for it to get this complicated, but sometimes things just change. The words hung in the air, and Sarah's heart started to race. She was on the verge of a revelation, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. Change? What do you mean? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What's going on, Mark? Why have you been so distant? Why are you leaving us? Mark sighed deeply, and for the first time, Sarah saw a crack in his usually confident demeanor. He stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. I've been struggling with something for a while now, he said, his eyes downcast. Something I should have told you a long time ago. The truth is, I've been fighting feelings I didn't understand, feelings that I shouldn't have. But I can't ignore them anymore. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean by that? She asked, her voice shaking. Mark looked up at her, his eyes full of regret. I never wanted to hurt you, but I've started feeling something that goes beyond what a stepfather should feel. I don't know how or why it happened, but I'm confused. Sarah, I don't want this. I didn't ask for it, but it's there, and it's ruining everything. The shock hit Sarah like a tidal wave. She couldn't process his words at first. What was he saying? Was he telling her that he had feelings for her? It didn't make sense. Her mind raced as the reality of what he was confessing started to sink in. This wasn't just a simple argument or misunderstanding. This was something much darker, something far more complicated. I don't know how to fix this, Mark continued, his voice almost pleading. I don't want to hurt you or your mother, but I can't stay here anymore. This feeling is tearing me apart. For the first time, Sarah saw him as vulnerable, broken even. She had always seen him as a stable figure, someone she could rely on, but now he was a man who was lost, struggling with his own emotions. The situation was no longer just about her discomfort, it was about something deeper, something she wasn't ready to face. I didn't want you to find out like this, Mark said, his voice cracking slightly, but I thought it was better to tell you the truth. Sarah stood frozen, unable to speak. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. Was this the real reason he had been acting so strange? Was he really feeling this way? Or was it just some kind of misunderstanding? Her mind screamed, with confusion, trying to make sense of everything, but the weight of his words hung over her, heavy and suffocating.